Daniel Morgan had always been obsessed with American history, but not in the way most scholars were. While others studied political shifts or military strategies, Daniel had always been drawn to what was not in the books, the strange footnotes, whispered rumors, and stories that seemed too eerie to be real. It was this obsession that brought him to the most famous residence in America, the White House. He was 32 and author of 2 niche books about haunted American landmarks and a firm believer that history doesn't die, it lingers. His latest project, titled The Ghosts of Power, aimed to uncover the haunted history of U.S. presidents and the building they called home. For years, he had studied sightings, testimonies from staff, unexplained noises, and cold drafts in halls with no open windows. But research wasn't enough. He needed to see it for himself. After months of negotiation and official paperwork, Daniel finally received what no civilian had gotten in over a century: permission to stay overnight inside the White House, not just for a tour, but for a full weekend of independent documentation. His arrangement had conditions. He couldn't enter certain rooms without escort. He had to respect security zones. And he had to leave no trace. But within those boundaries, he had free rein. His first evening arrived on a cold Friday in November. Washington, D.C. was unusually quiet, the sky heavy with clouds and an almost surreal stillness in the air. As Daniel passed through the security gates and stepped onto the iconic white stone steps, he felt a wave of anticipation and dread. This wasn't just another historical building. This was a place where power lived, died, and maybe, just maybe, remained behind. He was escorted to a modest guest room not far from the East Room. "You'll be safest here," the staff member had said with an awkward chuckle. "Or at least that's what they tell us." Daniel tried to laugh, but the look in the man's eyes said more than his words. He unpacked his gear: 3 voice recorders, an infrared camera, a notebook, and an EMF detector. He was ready. His first plan was simple: walk the halls, observe, and let the house speak to him. As the evening wore on, he moved through the rooms, whispering into his recorder, noting the silence that pressed in on him like invisible hands. Portraits watched him with eyes that seemed a little too lifelike. The chandeliers barely swayed, yet shadows danced oddly on the walls. He stopped in front of the Lincoln bedroom, arguably the most famous room associated with ghost sightings in the White House. He wasn't allowed inside yet, but he pressed his hand against the door, closed his eyes, and listened. Nothing. Returning to his room around midnight, Daniel reviewed some audio. A few faint creaks, a strange clicking sound, but nothing definitive. Still, he felt watched. Not in a paranoid way, but in a measured way. Like the house was aware of him. Lying in bed, he scrolled through historical notes on his phone. President Harrison reportedly heard footsteps late at night. Abigail Adams was seen floating through hallways, carrying laundry. Staff over the years reported the smell of roses appearing out of nowhere, believed to be Dolly Madison's signature scent. Lincoln had been seen multiple times by presidents, queens, and even Winston Churchill. These were not just campfire tales. These were documented. Respected people had seen these things. Daniel muttered into his recorder, "Night 1. No visual or audio contact yet. But the air, it's thick. It feels like the walls are holding their breath." Outside, the wind picked up. The trees swayed gently, and for a moment, Daniel thought he saw movement through the frosted glass window. But when he approached, nothing was there, just the reflection of his own face. He turned off the light and laid back. The clock read 1:33 a.m. Somewhere in the distance, very faintly, piano music began to play. Daniel sat up slowly, his heart thudding. The investigation had just begun. The faint notes of piano music drifted through the dark hallway like a distant lullaby, soft but hauntingly familiar. Daniel sat upright in bed, barely breathing, ears straining to catch every note. It wasn't a modern song, it sounded old, Civil War era perhaps, played on what must have been a grand piano. But he was alone. No staff were scheduled to be inside this wing after midnight. He reached for his recorder and whispered, hearing piano music. Unknown source. Time, 1:34 a.m. He grabbed his infrared camera and crept into the hallway. The music echoed faintly from the north side of the residence, toward the Lincoln bedroom. As he moved through the corridor, the lights flickered, not dramatically, just a subtle pulse, as if the electrical system itself was holding its breath. Daniel's footsteps were silent on the carpet, but something about the air had changed. It was denser, colder. As he reached the closed door of the Lincoln bedroom, the music stopped. He stood there, staring at the heavy wooden door. Slowly, cautiously, he raised his hand and turned the knob. It wasn't locked. The room beyond was dimly lit by moonlight bleeding through the tall windows. The air was icy, far colder than the rest of the building. The large 4-poster bed stood untouched, draped in pristine white sheets. Everything was exactly as the historical photographs had shown. But what froze Daniel in place wasn't the decor, it was the figure standing silently by the window. It was a tall man, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit, his back turned. He stood with his hands behind his back, gazing out at the lawn. Daniel's heart pounded. The shape was unmistakable. The beard. The stovepipe hat resting on the small table nearby. He didn't need to guess. President Lincoln? Daniel whispered, barely audible. The figure didn't move. Didn't turn. Daniel raised his camera and took a single photo. The camera's screen went black. It had powered off without warning. Suddenly, the figure turned. There was no horror, no screaming. Just a calm, weary expression. The man's eyes were dark, heavy with centuries of sadness. He looked directly at Daniel, not with malice, but with something deeper. Recognition? Pity? Warning? Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Then, just like that, the figure faded. Not like a trick of the light, but like smoke in a breeze, there 1 second, gone the next. The room felt instantly warmer. The strange pressure in Daniel's chest lifted. Shaken, he backed away and closed the door slowly. In his room, Daniel scrambled to turn his camera back on. It worked, battery full, memory card intact. But the photo he took was corrupted, displaying only a streak of gray and static. He replayed his audio recorder. At the moment he saw the figure, there was a long silence, followed by a whisper, soft, almost inaudible. Not all are free. Daniel played the clip over and over, adjusting the volume. The whisper didn't sound like Lincoln, but the words chilled him to the bone. Not all are free. The phrase echoed in his mind as he sat staring at the wall. Morning came with pale sunlight and the bustle of staff returning to their stations. Daniel acted normal, but he was rattled. What had he really seen? A hallucination? A dream? But the cold, the whisper, the corrupted photo, all of it pointed to something real, something he couldn't explain away with science. He jotted in his journal, encountered apparition resembling Abraham Lincoln. Visual contact for approximate 8 to 10 seconds. Emotional atmosphere, sorrowful. Possible message received. Investigation to continue. He closed the notebook with shaking hands. This was no longer just research. It was personal now. The next evening, Daniel was no longer skeptical. He had seen someone that defied every logical explanation. Now he wasn't here to prove ghosts existed, he was here to find out why they did. What held them here? What did they want? As darkness blanketed the city once more, the White House grew silent. The echo of daily routines faded and Daniel found himself walking toward the East Room, recorder in hand. The room had a long and storied past. It had hosted weddings, funerals, and wartime announcements. It was also, according to legend, one of the most paranormally active places in the building. He stood near the center of the vast room beneath a massive chandelier. The room was dimly lit by wall sconces that flickered gently as if uneasy in their duty to provide comfort. He whispered into the recorder, East Room. 11:47 p.m. Temperature is dropping slightly. Then whispers. Faint, overlapping, as if several voices were speaking at once from opposite corners of the room. He spun around, trying to locate the source. Hello, he called out. The voices stopped. A sudden gust of cold wind passed through him, though all the windows were shut. And then, slowly, from the far end of the room, a woman began to materialize. She wore a high-waisted gown from the early 1800s, her hair pinned in intricate curls. She glided forward, her expression severe and proud. She didn't shimmer or flicker, she was solid, almost regal. Daniel stood frozen. He recognized her immediately, Dolly Madison. Her presence was commanding, her eyes fixed on him like an intruder. This room is not for the curious, she said sternly, her voice distant as if carried from a different century. Daniel stammered, I'm only here to listen. To understand. She took another step closer. Many have walked these halls with arrogance, digging into what should remain buried. The house remembers. It protects itself. The chandelier above them rattled as if in warning. Why are you still here? Daniel asked softly. Dolly's expression shifted just slightly. Not all memories are ours to leave behind. Some stay because justice never came. Her figure began to fade, not in fear, but in disappointment, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. Before disappearing entirely, she whispered, Don't wake the others. And she was gone. The room went completely still. Not a creak. Not a sound. Even the whispering had stopped. Daniel looked down at his recorder, heart pounding. It was still recording, but the moment Dolly had begun to speak, the device had started emitting static, interference, something scrambling the signal. He played it back, just a high-pitched hum during the entire encounter. Nothing else. Back in his room, Daniel couldn't sleep. He typed notes on his laptop while the phrase looped in his mind, "Don't wake the others." Who are the others? He wrote in his journal. Other spirits? Other presidents? Or something worse? He researched Dolly Madison's connection to the East Room. Historical documents revealed she had fiercely protected the White House during the War of 1812, even saving precious artifacts from the British. But there were rumors unconfirmed that she had conducted spiritual rituals during periods of grief, that she believed spirits lingered where emotion remained unresolved. The more he read, the more he realized something terrifying. The White House was not simply haunted by the famous. It was a layered spiritual battlefield of sorrow, guilt, power, and blood. And the ghosts were not aimless, they remembered. Daniel scrawled on the final page of his notebook for the night, "This house is not haunted. It is inhabited." He placed the notebook down, turned off the light, and laid in bed. Fully clothed, recorder running beside him, camera ready. But sleep never came. Not with the knowledge that something was watching him through the mirror. By the third night, Daniel had stopped pretending he was in control. He no longer walked the halls with quiet confidence, but with cautious reverence. Whatever haunted the White House wasn't just a collection of harmless spirits acting out the past. It was intelligent, watching, choosing when to appear and when to retreat. That morning, over lukewarm coffee in the visitor's lounge, Daniel reviewed his notes. 3 nights, 3 encounters, each tied to a specific figure, each with a message. Not all free. Don't wake the others. These weren't just ghostly visits, they were warnings. One recurring detail in his research kept nagging at him. A brief reference in an old journal belonging to a wartime aide in the Lincoln administration. The entry, dated 1863, mentioned a sealed chamber beneath the West Wing, used in the event of an invasion. It wasn't in any official White House blueprint he could find, but Daniel knew that basements, tunnels, and secret rooms were part of the mansion's long, buried history. Late that afternoon, Daniel ventured to the lower levels of the building. These areas were restricted, but he had been granted limited access for research, and the overnight staff, skeptical of his purpose, mostly left him alone. He found what he was looking for near the base of an old stairwell, partially hidden behind an equipment cabinet. The stone wall was uneven. Dust covered everything, but the faint outline of a door, sealed with thick mortar, was visible. Someone had tried to erase it from history. Daniel placed his hand against it. Cold. That same unnatural cold he had felt in the Lincoln bedroom and the East Room. He stepped back and inspected the wall further. Above the doorframe, etched into the stone so faintly it was nearly invisible, was a Latin phrase, "Silentium est custodia veritatis." Silence is the guardian of truth. The phrase sent a chill down his spine. Suddenly, his recorder picked up a distant sound. Marching. Slow, heavy, deliberate. He turned and looked down the hallway. Nothing. But the sound grew louder. Thud, thud, thud. Daniel turned back toward the wall and found it gone. In its place was a long, candlelit corridor that hadn't existed seconds ago. His instincts screamed at him to run. But his obsession pushed him forward. The corridor smelled of damp stone, ash, and iron. The flickering candlelight cast strange shadows that didn't always move in sync with his body. He walked slowly, filming, whispering into his recorder. Then the sound began again, boots, shouts, pain. And suddenly he was no longer alone. Soldiers began appearing around him. Not solid, not fully formed, but translucent echoes of men in uniform. Some were Union soldiers, others Confederate. All looked lost, confused, injured. A young boy no older than 16 stumbled through Daniel, gasping for breath. A man clutched his stomach, blood pouring from a wound that would never heal. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a memory loop replaying itself endlessly. A spiritual scar from the war trapped beneath the symbol of American leadership. Daniel stood frozen as the ghostly battalion passed. A man with a half-burned face looked right at him and whispered, "We died in silence." And they were gone. The candlelight vanished. Daniel turned on his flashlight, it flickered, then failed. When the lights came back on, he was back in the storage corridor. The hidden doorway was sealed once again. No sign of the passage or the soldiers. Breathing heavily, he stumbled back up the stairs and into the West Wing lobby. His recorder had captured only static during the entire event. His camera battery was inexplicably drained. He sat against the wall, hands trembling. They had shown him something terrible, something forgotten or hidden. These weren't just ghosts. They were casualties of history, erased from records but still bound to the place that had failed to remember them. That night, Daniel added a final note to his journal before passing out from exhaustion. The ghosts here aren't angry because they're dead. They're angry because they were forgotten. Daniel didn't sleep. Not really. He drifted in and out of shallow dreams filled with marching boots and whispering voices. He awoke to a splitting headache and the distinct sense that someone had been standing at the foot of his bed all night. By now, Daniel had stopped questioning reality. The events he had witnessed were not dreams. They weren't the result of stress or suggestion. They were real as anything he had ever experienced. He'd gone to the White House in search of historical ghosts. What he found were souls, still trapped, still speaking, begging to be heard. And they were leading him somewhere. The next day, while reviewing old maps and unauthorized blueprints from a former contractor, leaked decades ago and now buried deep in online archives, Daniel discovered something. An anomaly in the original architecture beneath the East Wing. A gap. An area with no listed purpose, no known use, completely unaccounted for. A hidden room. He spent most of the day working to find its physical location. After hours of cross-referencing maps with his current position, he traced the hidden room to a narrow maintenance corridor he had passed a dozen times. At 11:40 p.m., he returned there with a flashlight, recorder, and fresh batteries. At the end of the corridor, he found a panel in the wall. Not stone, wood, disguised and painted to match the surroundings. A small brass handle was visible if one looked close enough. He gripped it and pulled. The door creaked open. Behind it lay a narrow stairwell, spiraling downward into pitch blackness. He paused, steadied his breathing, and descended. The air was stale, damp, and thick with the scent of mildew and rust. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy steel door. On it, scratched into the surface, were the initials. H.T. Daniel felt a chill run through him. Harry Truman, the president known for hearing unexplained knocks at his door and writing about phantoms in letters to his wife. This door, this room, must have something to do with it. He pushed the door open with effort. The hidden room beyond was small, no more than 20 feet across. Stone walls, a metal table in the center, shelves lined with thick tomes, old photographs and artifacts, preserved but forgotten. A large mirror hung on the far wall, cracked in one corner. And in that mirror he wasn't alone. Daniel turned. No one was there, but in the reflection someone was standing behind him. A figure in a military uniform from the 1940s, clean-shaven, hat in hand, eyes hollow. Daniel slowly turned back toward the mirror. The figure stared at him, then raised one hand and pointed at the table. Daniel hesitated, then approached the metal table. On it lay a thick file folder, yellowed and brittle. It was labeled simply, Project Sentinella Do Not Archive. Inside were pages upon pages of typewritten reports, death records, incident summaries, journal entries from guards and aides, descriptions of sightings, disturbances, and a secret protocol for containment of spiritual anomalies. One line stood out: certain spirits tied to national trauma do not move on. They remain near sites of great historical weight. The White House appears to act as a spiritual conductor, drawing them in. Daniel dropped the folder, heart pounding. That's what this room was. Not a panic room. Not a shelter. A vault. A containment chamber for the haunted residue of American history. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The air turned ice cold. From the mirror, a hand pressed against the glass from the inside. Cracks splintered out across the surface. And from all around him, voices began to rise. Free us, they lied, we served, we died. Daniel stumbled out, slamming the steel door behind him. He bolted up the stairs, heart racing, ears ringing with phantom screams that chased him to the surface. By the time he reached the corridor above, the hidden panel had vanished again, sealed as if it had never existed. He pressed his back to the wall, breath shallow, trying to understand the enormity of what he had uncovered. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a secret burial ground of memory, a purgatory locked beneath the most powerful building in the world. And someone, long ago, had tried to lock it all away. Daniel didn't leave the White House the next day. He thought about it, packed his gear, sat in the visitor's lounge for hours staring at the front gate. But something pulled him back. Not curiosity anymore. Not even fear. It was duty, a strange sense of obligation to the spirits who had revealed themselves to him. They weren't just haunting the White House. They were trapped in it. And they were reaching out. That night, Daniel returned to the Lincoln bedroom. This time, he came not as an investigator, but as a messenger. He set up no cameras. No recorders. He simply sat in the middle of the room, on the floor, and whispered, "I'm listening." For a long time, there was only silence. And then a soft groan from the floorboards. A shift in temperature. That familiar weight pressing down on the air. The presence arrived quietly, like it didn't want to scare him. When Daniel opened his eyes, Abraham Lincoln was standing there once more, tall, solemn, his black suit more defined than before, eyes heavy with weariness. His mouth did not move, but his voice entered Daniel's mind like a whisper inside a dream. "You've seen what they buried." Daniel nodded slowly. The room beneath the West Wing. Project Sentinella. Lincoln's gaze dropped as if ashamed. They believed they could contain the past. But truth does not sleep and the dead do not forget. Daniel's throat was dry. Why are they still here? Why haven't you moved on? For the first time, something like sorrow passed over Lincoln's face. He walked slowly toward the window, staring out into the night like he did the first night Daniel saw him. The work was not finished. I tried to bind a nation with words and laws. But wounds that deep, they don't close easy. They fester. They echo. He turned back to Daniel. His form flickered faintly like a dying flame resisting the wind. We were meant to remember, not repress. To face our ghosts, not lock them away. The chamber was built to silence what must be heard. That is why we remain. Daniel's heart pounded. He stood, slowly. Then what do I do? How do I help? Lincoln looked at him, this time with the stern gravity of a commander. Not a ghost. Tell the story. Open the door. Bring light to the dark. They will try to stop you. They always do. As his form began to fade, his voice lingered. But truth is stronger than stone. Daniel stood alone once more. But this time he felt clear. Not lost. Not confused. This haunting was never just about fear. It was about truth and the consequences of burying it. Back in his room, Daniel opened his laptop and began typing. The White House is haunted, not by phantoms of fear, but by echoes of truth. Spirits of those forgotten by history. Presidents, soldiers, servants, even children. They linger not because they want to, but because they were never allowed to leave. We sealed their pain beneath concrete. We silenced their stories beneath legacy. But the ghosts remain. They are the country's unfinished sentence. And now I am its witness. He clicked save. Suddenly, the mirror in his room fogged up. Daniel stepped closer. In the condensation, a single message appeared, slowly writing itself as if traced by an invisible hand. You're not alone. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks from inside the wall behind him. Daniel woke to the sound of thunder, but the skies outside were clear. It wasn't a storm. It was something else. A deep, rhythmic sound coming from beneath the building like a drumbeat echoing through stone. The knocking had returned, louder this time. Desperate. He grabbed his notes, camera, and flashlight. He had no access key, no security badge for lower levels, but something told him he didn't need one anymore. The White House was letting him through now. Not the living building, but the dead within it. Daniel moved quickly, heart pounding as he descended to the lowest known level beneath the East Wing. The panel that had once vanished from the wall was back, and wide open. The stairwell waited for him. He didn't hesitate. As he descended, the rhythmic drumbeats grew louder. Not literal drums, but the echo of soldiers' boots, marching in formation. A memory that had become sound. It grew more intense with each step. When he reached the hidden vault again, the chamber labeled Project Sentinella, he found the steel door ajar. Cold air poured out in thick waves. The lights inside flickered. Voices rose like wind through a canyon. Forgotten? Erased? Help us! Daniel entered. This time, the chamber was filled with them. Spirits lined the walls. Not just the Union and Confederate soldiers he'd seen before, but slaves, servants, political prisoners, the unjustly accused, even construction workers from centuries past who had died building the foundations of the building. They stood silently, watching him. Some wept. Others saluted. Some simply nodded as if acknowledging that he had come when so many others had turned away. In the center of the room, the cracked mirror pulsed with a strange light. Daniel stepped forward, drawn to it. As he approached, the mirror's surface rippled. Images flashed within, Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. Dolly Madison carrying paintings out during the British invasion. Soldiers bleeding in the halls. A maid cleaning the floor only to vanish when a shadow fell across her. And then an image of himself standing in the room surrounded by ghosts. The mirror spoke in a voice that was many voices at once. They wrote history without us. They carved monuments and forgot our names. But we remember. Daniel swallowed hard. Then tell me. I'll listen. I'll write it down. The mirror stilled. A shape emerged from it, a child. She was no older than 7. Her eyes were wide and sad, her dress tattered, her hand holding a faded teddy bear. She looked up at him and whispered, I died in a fire. No one ever asked my name. Daniel knelt down, eyes wet. What's your name? She blinked, then said, Sarah. Sarah Elkins. The mirror pulsed again, and suddenly the room filled with names. Thousands. Millions. Echoing through the chamber like falling rain. Daniel wrote. He filled pages. Not stories of presidents or treaties or wars, but of people. The ones history had hidden. The ghosts whose truth had been denied. And as he wrote, the room began to change. The cold lifted. The flickering lights steadied. The spirits began to fade, but this time not in sorrow. In peace. They had been seen. The mirror cracked one final time and shattered. Dust settled. Silence returned. And the chamber, once a prison, was just a room again. Daniel stood in the quiet and whispered, You're not forgotten anymore. 1 week after leaving the White House, Daniel Whitmore sat in a quiet office in Washington, D.C., staring at the manuscript he had just completed. Titled The White House Hauntings, Echoes of the Forgotten, it wasn't what publishers had expected when they funded his research. They wanted cold spots and creaky floors, shadowy figures, and spooky thrills. What Daniel gave them was something else, testimony. The stories of soldiers lost to history. Of servants who never saw freedom. Of children who died in silence. Of presidents who carried the burden of a nation even into death. He had documented names, visions, voices. He had mapped hidden rooms. He had transcribed the whispers of the past. And now, with one click, he submitted the manuscript for publication. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel received no calls, no emails, no replies from the publisher. When he checked the submission portal, his file was gone. Not rejected. Not delayed. Gone. Then came the knock at his door. 2 men in suits. No identification. No names. They smiled, but their eyes didn't. We'd like to talk about your recent experience, one of them said. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. They didn't threaten him. They didn't warn him. They asked vague questions and gave even vaguer answers. But the message was clear. Some stories weren't meant to be told. After they left, Daniel checked his apartment. His notes were gone. His recordings erased. His camera memory card corrupted. Only one thing remained. The journal he had kept from the beginning, tucked beneath a floorboard, untouched. He flipped it open. On the last page, in handwriting he didn't recognize, was a single message. Truth lives in shadows until someone carries it into the light. Lincoln. Daniel smiled. They could erase the files. They could erase his report. But they couldn't erase the experience. He'd seen too much. So he started again. Wrote it by hand this time. And uploaded it to anonymous platforms, one by one. No flashy headlines. No marketing. Just stories. Stories of those the White House tried to forget. And as the pages spread across forums, websites, and quiet corners of the web, strange things began happening. Security guards at the White House reported voices in the halls calling names from Daniel's journal. A tourist posted a video of a little girl in 19th century clothing waving at her from a second-floor window. Sarah Elkins. Historians began re-examining records long thought lost or misfiled. And every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's final night in the hidden chamber, the lights in the East Wing would flicker at exactly midnight. The building had become active. Not angry. Awake. And Daniel? He moved to a small town in Virginia and kept writing. Not horror novels. Not ghost thrillers. But truths. The kind you only hear if you're quiet long enough. If you listen. The White House still stands. Tourists still walk its halls, unaware of what lies beneath. But some every now and then feel a cold breeze with no source. Hear footsteps where none should be. Catch a glimpse of Lincoln at the window. Or a little girl clutching a bear in the East Wing, smiling sadly. And somewhere, in the whisper between history and haunting, a voice still speaks, don't forget us. 2.